The Whitmore estate didn't just sit on the edge of Savannah. It hovered like something out of a southern fairy tale no one ever quite trusted. Bellevue was draped in Spanish moss and secrecy, with winding gravel paths and white columned porches that had seen generations sip sweet tea while keeping darker truths pressed behind pressed smiles. Clara stepped out of the town car, the hem of her pale blue dress brushing the stone walkway. She paused before ascending the steps, eyes grazing the tall oak doors. The house was grand, yes, but tonight it felt like walking into a room that used to know her and had since forgotten. Behind her, Harrison barely waited for the driver to close the trunk before he was on his phone again, murmuring something about seating charts and investors. He didn't look at Clara. He hadn't on the plane or during the ride from the airport, or even at breakfast. She inhaled slowly. "Don't do that," he said, not looking up. "Do what that sigh thing. Like I've already ruined your night." "I didn't say a word. You didn't have to." She turned toward the door instead of responding. Two waitstaff greeted them with wide, well-practiced smiles. Everyone knew who the Whitmores were, especially on Founders Gala night. Inside, the scent of magnolia and polished wood lingered in the air. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen rain, and the floors gleamed in the candlelight. Guests in jewel-toned gowns and tailored tuxedos dotted the vast front hall, their laughter light, their judgment quieter, but always present. Clara nodded politely as they passed Harrison, offering quick handshakes and half-hugs. She followed one step behind. Always behind, even here in the house that bore her married name. "You look radiant tonight," one woman offered. Clara recognized her vaguely, perhaps one of Harrison's cousins. "Thank you," Clara replied with a soft smile. "It's nice to be back. You haven't been here since—" The woman trailed off, eyes darting toward Harrison. Clara didn't answer. She didn't need to. Everyone knew they'd skipped last year. There had been excuses, business illness, but the truth was simpler. She couldn't stomach walking these halls being watched, whispered about, while Harrison pretended. Sabrina was already in the ballroom. Of course she was. Clara spotted her the moment they entered, sleek in a black satin gown, standing under the golden chandelier like she belonged in the center of the room. Her hair fell in perfect waves. Her laugh floated above the jazz band's soft intro. Several men turned as she walked past, including one Clara didn't recognize, a sharply dressed stranger with quiet eyes. Sabrina caught sight of Harrison first. She didn't rush. That wasn't her style. Instead, she glided toward him with the ease of someone who'd already been told she had nothing to worry about. Clara braced herself. "Harrison," Sabrina said, voice warm, too warm. "You made it." He smiled. "Of course. Wouldn't miss it." Sabrina's eyes flicked to Clara. "Clara, always so classic. That color's sweet on you." "Thank you," Clara replied. "And you're working tonight?" Sabrina's smile tightened just slightly. "I'm here in a consulting capacity. PR for the firm's upcoming expansion. You know how much Harrison trusts me with his public image." "I've heard," Clara said, calm and unreadable. "Ladies," Harrison said lightly, "let's not do this. It's a celebration." But it wasn't a celebration for Clara. Not really. It was an annual display. A performance. The Founders Gala was a chance for every relative investor and hanger-on to parade their wealth toast, the family legacy, and pretend they all liked each other. She noticed May across the room, her husband's great-aunt. One of the few Whitmores who treated Clara like more than a temporary accessory. May raised her glass in a quiet show of support. Clara nodded back, grateful. "Excuse me," Clara said to no one in particular. "I'd like a drink." She stepped away before anyone could object, weaving through the crowd, until she reached the far end of the ballroom. A waiter offered champagne. She took it, though she barely sipped. Her eyes scanned the room. Couples posed for photos beneath the hand-carved balcony. A string quartet played off to one side. Everything looked polished. Perfect. So why did she feel like she was underwater? You're Clara, right? She turned. The man from earlier, the one Sabrina had been speaking to, stood beside her now. He had kind eyes, measured, like he watched more than he said. I am. Elliot Brooks, he said, offering his hand. Investor, friend of Franklin's. She shook it politely. Nice to meet you. Franklin doesn't usually bring guests. He smiled. He said this year needed a fresh perspective. Clara raised an eyebrow. On family. On everything, he replied, sipping his drink. Though from what I've seen already, there's more going on than I was warned about. She tilted her head. You've seen what exactly? He held her gaze. Enough to notice you've got good posture but keep shrinking your presence, and that the woman in black seems to think she owns the floor. Clara blinked, startled. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed, soft and genuine. It's rare anyone notices anything beyond the wine and the gossip, she said. I prefer stories over noise. Elliot set his voice low. A hush moved through the crowd. Franklin Whitmore had entered the ballroom. Tall, dignified, and slow-moving, the family patriarch didn't need to say a word. Conversation softened. Guests straightened their backs. Clara watched him greet a few close associates, then step toward the center of the room. He lifted a glass. The room stilled. To legacy, he said simply, and the people who honor it with quiet integrity. Clara's chest tightened. His words felt deliberate. After the toast, Harrison reappeared at her side, all charm and camera angles. Smile, Clara. They're filming this part. She did. Just enough. And in that moment, standing between a man who'd stopped seeing her and a stranger who saw too much, she realized something important. She didn't want to be silent anymore. Not here. Not tonight. And certainly not in a house where every chandelier knew more truth than the guests beneath them. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The dining room was already filled with the low hum of conversation and the occasional clink of silver against porcelain by the time Clara stepped in. Long tables stretched beneath crystal chandeliers, each centerpiece an elaborate arrangement of white roses and pale blue hydrangeas, elegant, coordinated cold. Like everything else at Bellevue, she moved quietly to her seat beside Harrison, who didn't even glance up from his phone. Across from them sat Sabrina, legs crossed, fingers grazing the rim of her wine glass, like she was rehearsing a monologue. You found your way, Sabrina said with a faint smile, as though Clara had been lost. I was beginning to worry. Clara took her napkin and unfolded it with care. It's my husband's family home. I think I know my way around. Oh, of course, Sabrina said lightly. I suppose old habits never die. Clara looked up, met her gaze. Some do, some need to. Harrison cleared his throat, finally glancing between them. Let's not do this here. Sabrina shrugged, reaching for her drink, just making polite conversation. From down the table, May caught Clara's eye and offered a small, supportive smile. Clara returned it with a brief nod, grateful for the silent encouragement. May always seemed to know when to anchor her. I heard Franklin's bringing in outside funding. A man 2 seats over said, steering the table back to business. Big development coming up by the river. Has to be at least 8 figures. Clara watched Harrison stiffen slightly. He leaned forward, his tone even. It's early stage. Nothing finalized. Well, word is he's grooming someone to take it over. The man continued, glancing toward Franklin's end of the table. And if I had to guess, Sabrina said, lifting her glass, it'll be someone with vision. The kind of person who understands branding in a modern world. A few guests chuckled softly. Clara felt it. The undertone. The suggestion she didn't belong in those conversations. That whatever strength she had once brought to this family, whatever quiet loyalty support Grace, was irrelevant now. She placed her fork down carefully. Across the room, Elliot Brooks stood near the wall, speaking with Franklin. His posture was relaxed, but attentive. Every now and then his eyes drifted toward Clara. Not staring. Just noticing. When dessert arrived, Sabrina leaned over with a soft laugh. "Do you remember the first time you came here, Clara? You were in that little green dress. I thought you were a gardener." Clara felt the burn in her chest, but her face stayed calm. "You're mistaken," she replied softly. "That was Sage, and Franklin said I looked like spring." Sabrina's lips parted, just slightly. Clara smiled, warm, gracious, untouchable. Later, as the room emptied slowly toward the ballroom for post-dinner drinks and music, Clara remained seated. She needed a moment, just one. "You okay?" She looked up. Elliot had approached without fanfare, his voice low, concerned, but not intrusive. "I'm fine," she said, "just remembering who I used to be." He tilted his head. "And who is that?" She hesitated. Someone who thought staying quiet kept the peace. Elliot nodded slowly. Sometimes silence is grace. Other times it's permission. Their eyes met. Something passed between them. Not flirtation. Not yet. Something steadier. An understanding. From across the room, Harrison watched. His jaw tightened. Not in jealousy. It wasn't that simple. Clara stood adjusting the shawl around her shoulders. "Would you walk with me?" she asked Elliot, surprising herself. He nodded once. They moved through the corridor toward the side veranda, past portraits of stern men and delicate women, all captured in oil and ambition. Outside, the evening air was cool, the sky streaked with faint pink as twilight settled in. Fireflies blinked lazily in the garden. "I don't think anyone's ever actually enjoyed this event," Clara said finally, allowing herself to exhale. Elliot chuckled. "It's not exactly warm. It's not meant to be. It's meant to remind everyone who they're not." He studied her face for a beat. "But you're not like them." Clara looked out toward the hedges. "I was once, or tried to be. I thought if I smiled enough, smoothed over enough, I'd belong." "You don't need to belong to that," he said. "You're already standing in the place they all want to reach." She turned to him. "What place is that self-respect?" Elliot replied. "And maybe something even harder. Peace." A breeze moved through the trees. From inside, a swell of jazz floated out, faint and distant. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said, more hesitant now. "Of course. Why did you notice me earlier?" "There are 100 people here more interesting." Elliot didn't smile. Not quite. But there was something kind in the way he looked at her. "Because you looked like the only one not trying to impress anyone. That's rare." She didn't know what to say to that. No one had ever noticed her silence like it mattered before. Inside, the music changed. Louder. Livelier. "Should we go back?" she asked. He nodded. "If you're ready." They stepped back through the heavy French doors. In the ballroom, Sabrina twirled beneath the chandelier with a glass in her hand, laughing too loudly, standing too close to Harrison. Several guests watched. A few whispered. Clara re-entered the room with Elliot by her side. She didn't make a scene. She didn't need to. But suddenly, for the first time in years, people saw her. And more importantly, she saw herself. The ballroom had shifted. Something about the lighting, the mood, the energy. It no longer felt like Clara was walking through the background of someone else's story. Her footsteps echoed softly on the marble floor as she re-entered with Elliot beside her, But it wasn't just the sound that caught attention. It was her presence. People turned. Not all at once. Not obviously. But enough. Clara held her posture head slightly lifted, her hand resting on the edge of her shawl. She wasn't trying to be seen. She simply wasn't hiding anymore. Elliot leaned slightly toward her and whispered, "You're more interesting than the paintings in the hall." She looked at him out of the corner of her eye. "That's not a high bar. Most of them haven't blinked in 100 years. He smiled. "Still, you move differently now." Clara didn't respond. Not because she disagreed, but because part of her didn't know how to explain what had shifted. Maybe it was Elliot's honesty. Maybe it was Sabrina's smirk. Maybe it was the quiet ache of years spent fading herself down to make others more comfortable. Whatever it was awake now. As they passed near the bar, Sabrina's laugh rang out again. That effortless, practiced trill Clara had once tried to mimic before realizing imitation only diluted her soul. "Well, this is new," Sabrina said, not bothering to lower her voice. "You found a new escort, Clara, or are we trying out networking tonight?" Clara stopped. Elliot paused beside her, unreadable. The guests nearby turned, slightly drawn by the shift in tone. Clara met Sabrina's gaze without flinching. "Just having a conversation. That's still allowed, isn't it?" Sabrina's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course. I just hope Harrison doesn't get the wrong impression." Clara's voice was even. "Harrison stopped paying attention a long time ago. I doubt he'd notice anything now." A few guests blinked. One woman looked down at her drink, pretending not to eavesdrop. Sabrina raised an eyebrow. Still sharp. "I'd almost forgotten that about you. You only forget what you never cared to learn." Clara replied, then turned and walked away without waiting for a response. Elliot followed her, but not too closely. He understood the art of space. In the far corner of the ballroom, a small lounge area had been arranged with velvet chairs and low tables. Clara slipped into one, exhaling as she leaned back. Her hands were steady. Her heartbeat wasn't. "I'm sorry," she said softly. Elliot tilted his head. "For what I shouldn't have engaged. It's childish." "No," he said, sitting across from her. "It was honest. That's rare in this room." Clara looked around. The grandeur of the space was overwhelming when viewed all at once, so she focused on details. The flickering of a single votive candle, the fray at the hem of a linen napkin, the soft hiss of a champagne bottle being opened behind the bar. "I don't know how it came to this," she murmured. "This place, this distance, the marriage that became a business agreement." Elliot didn't push, just waited. Clara's voice was quieter now. "There was a time I believed in this, in him. We used to talk about simple things, teaching, traveling, building something meaningful. Then the title came. COO, then the image consultants, the speeches, the travel, and then the woman in the black dress." Elliot's gaze didn't shift. He forgot who he was with, or who he was. Clara offered a small, sad smile. "I think he started believing his own press releases." A shadow moved across the lounge as Harrison approached. "May I speak with my wife for a moment?" he asked, directing the question not to Clara, but to Elliot. Clara didn't even blink. "If you'd like to speak to me, Harrison, you can ask me directly." There was a beat of silence, the kind that told you everyone was still listening even if no one was looking. Harrison cleared his throat. "Alone." Clara stood. "Of course." Elliot gave her a slight nod before walking away. Harrison motioned for her to follow him into the adjoining hallway just outside the ballroom doors. The space was quieter, dimmer, the music now just a murmur through the walls. "What are you doing?" Harrison asked, his voice low but tight. "I don't understand the question. You're making a scene." talking to Elliot Brooks like that. I had a conversation, Harrison. That's not a crime. It's not appropriate. Clara tilted her head. Is that how we're measuring appropriateness? Now I'm not the one who brought their public relations consultant to a family gala and let her introduce herself like the hostess. Harrison looked away for half a second, just enough to say more than he intended. She's part of the team. That's all? No, she's part of your narrative, Clara said. And I'm no longer interested in playing a supporting role in someone else's script. He stared at her. I don't know what's gotten into you. Clara gave a faint smile. Maybe I've just remembered I still exist. Before he could answer, May appeared quietly from the ballroom. Forgive the interruption, she said gently. But Franklin's asking for Clara. Harrison blinked. Why May's eyes didn't leave Clara's. He didn't say, just asked for her by name. Clara stepped forward. Tell him I'll be right there. May nodded and slipped back through the door. Harrison ran a hand through his hair. Just be careful what you say. Clara paused, then looked at him fully. I used to be. And look where that got me. She turned and walked toward the ballroom, her heels silent on the polished floor. Behind her, Harrison stood still, alone, framed by silence. Clara didn't know what Franklin wanted. But for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel afraid to find out. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. Clara found Franklin in the study, standing near the fireplace with a tumbler of water in his hand. Not bourbon, not tonight. The room was quiet, heavy with the scent of old books and wood polish. It was one of the few spaces in the house that hadn't been modernized. No digital screens, just carved wood oil paintings and silence that had a way of forcing truth to the surface. He didn't turn when she entered. He didn't need to. Clara, he said, like he'd been expecting her all evening. She stepped inside, letting the door close gently behind her. May said you wanted to see me. I did. He finally faced her. His eyes, sharp beneath his silver brows, studied her not with scrutiny, but with something closer to reverence. Or maybe regret. I've been watching you tonight, he said. Clara folded her hands in front of her. I figured as much. This house has more eyes than windows. Franklin almost smiled. Your mother used to say that. Her breath caught. You remember her? I remember everything he said quietly, including the day you married my son. You stood at the edge of the lawn in that simple gown, hands shaking but your eyes steady. I thought there's someone who understands what it means to carry grace through fire. Clara looked down. The floor beneath her felt less steady now. A lot's changed since then. Franklin nodded once. Yes. And not all of it for the better. He gestured toward a chair near the fireplace. Sit. Please. She obeyed not out of obligation, but because the weight of his voice left little room for resistance. He took the chair opposite hers, setting his glass down on the side table. I won't dance around what you already know, he said. Harrison's decisions haven't been guided by the wisdom I'd hoped he'd develop by now. Clara remained still. He's good at protecting the brand, and terrible at protecting what matters. Franklin sighed, then leaned forward. But I didn't ask you here to rehash his failures. Then why he paused, looked at her like he was measuring a moment that had taken years to reach. Because this house Bellevue isn't his. Clara blinked. What Franklin's tone didn't shift. It's yours. The silence between them cracked like glass. Clara stared at him, unsure if she'd misheard or misunderstood. He continued. I transferred ownership 4 years ago. Quietly. Legally. You signed the papers, probably thought it was another batch of Charity Foundation documents. I don't understand. I watched what was happening. To you. To this family. I knew you wouldn't ask for anything, Clara. You never have. So I made sure you'd have something no one could take from you." Her heart beat hard against her ribs. "Why now? Why tell me tonight? Because power is only useful when you realize you have it," Franklin said. "And I watched you walk back into this house like you belonged in it, not as a guest, not as a wife, but as something steadier. I thought it was time you knew the truth." Clara swallowed, hands clenched in her lap. "He'll never forgive you." "Maybe not," Franklin said. "But forgiveness and understanding are rarely found in the same room, and I'm too old to pretend I don't see who deserves to carry this legacy forward." She sat back, stunned. This house, this entire empire of memory and marble was hers. Franklin leaned closer, voice low. "You have more control than you think, but you need to decide what you want to do with it." "I don't even know where to start," she whispered. "You already did," he said. "You came back." A soft knock at the door interrupted them. It opened a sliver, and a young staff member leaned in. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm sorry, but there's been a small situation." Franklin sighed, standing slowly. "Let me guess. Sabrina." The staffer looked nervous. She may have spilled something on Mrs. Whitmore's dress. Clara closed her eyes for a second, then opened them again. "What kind of something, red wine?" "Of course." Franklin looked at her. "Would you like me to handle it?" "No," Clara said, rising to her feet. "I think I will." As she left the study, the soft hum of a distant saxophone crept through the halls. Guests had returned to their mingling. The music was slower, now smokier. She reached the ballroom in time to see Sabrina holding a napkin, cooing apologies that didn't sound like apologies at all. "Oh, Clara," Sabrina said, her tone sticky sweet. "I'm so sorry. I was just reaching for the cheese tray." And Clara didn't look at the dress. She didn't look at the red stain blooming like a wound across the silk. She looked straight into Sabrina's eyes. "It's just fabric," Clara said, voice calm. "But you've been trying to stain something bigger than that for years, haven't you?" Gasps rippled, subtle, soft, but real. Sabrina blinked, smile faltering. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do," Clara said. "You've been playing hostess in a house that doesn't belong to you, offering opinions you were never asked for, whispering lies as if repetition makes them truth." Someone, perhaps Jonah, choked softly on his drink. Clara stepped forward. "This isn't about wine," she said, "or dresses, or even Harrison. This is about dignity, about the quiet things that erode when no one's watching." Sabrina opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Clara smiled, not cruelly, not victoriously, just truthfully. "Careful," she added, almost a whisper. "This house remembers everything." Then she turned and walked through the parting crowd, red wine trailing like a sash behind her. But no one noticed the stain anymore. They only saw the woman who had just claimed a room she'd always been told to stay quiet in. And somewhere by the French doors, Elliot Brooks watched her go. His glass untouched. His heart not. Clara stepped into the dim hallway just off the ballroom, heart still pounding, not with fear, but with something electric. Her fingers trembled as she touched the ruined silk of her gown. The wine had already dried into the fabric a dark, dramatic smear. Let it stain, she thought. Let it mark the moment. For years, she'd swallowed words to keep the piece-pressed smiles into place, like wallpaper over cracked plaster. But now the cracks had become a doorway. She was halfway to the grand staircase when she heard his voice. "Clara." She turned. Elliot stood near the archway, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. I saw, he said quietly. Clara gave a soft, breathless laugh. I'm sure everyone did. I mean the way you stood there. The way you said what needed to be said. Her eyes dropped to the floor for a second. I didn't plan to. I didn't even know I could. You did more than speak. You shifted the entire room. She looked up at him, then really looked. The lines near his mouth were softer now, his eyes not just kind, but lit with something else. Something warmer. Protective, maybe. Or admiring. Or both. I didn't come here to start anything, she said, voice low. I only wanted to survive the night. You didn't survive it, Clara. You owned it. The words settled into her slow and steady like rain soaking into dry soil. She hadn't realized how thirsty she'd been for something true. For a beat, neither of them moved. The chandelier's glow spilled through the archway behind him, catching the edge of his jacket, the curve of his jaw. She broke the silence. I should change. Elliot nodded once. Can I walk you to your room? Clara hesitated, not because she didn't want him to, but because she did. And that truth surprised her. Yes, she said softly. You can. They ascended the wide staircase together, step by step. The house had gone quiet above the main floor. Only the distant hum of jazz and murmuring guests drifted up like fading perfume. On the landing, Clara paused in front of a double door. This was once Franklin's private wing, she said. He moved to the guest house after his stroke, and insisted I take it. Said it was quieter up here. Elliot smiled faintly. He's not wrong. Clara pushed the door open. The suite was warm and lived in. Not sterile like the guest rooms reserved for show. A half-read book on the nightstand. A framed photograph of her late mother tucked discreetly near the vanity. She hadn't brought much into this house, but what she had, she'd hidden here. She gestured toward the closet. Give me a moment. Elliot turned to face the window while she stepped into the dressing room. Her heart was still racing. Her fingers fumbled at the zipper of the ruined gown. She slipped into a navy wrap dress, simple, soft, comfortable. Something she'd bought on impulse and never worn. When she returned, Elliot had poured her a glass of water from the pitcher on the side table. You didn't have to wait, she said. I wasn't going to leave. Something about the way he said it, not with expectation, not with pressure, just quiet certainty, stilled her. She took the glass from him, their fingers brushing. I don't know what this is, she said after a long silence, or what I'm doing. You don't have to know. I'm married. He nodded. I know, but I'm not loved, not seen. I've been standing still for so long I forgot how to move. Elliot's voice was steady. You don't owe me anything, Clara, or anyone else, but you owe yourself the truth. She looked at him, eyes stinging. And what if I don't know what that truth is yet? Then I'll wait, he said. Until you do. She set the glass down, voice catching. Why are you being so kind to me? His reply was almost a whisper. Because I see you. And I know what it means to be invisible to the person who promised to see you most. Clara's throat tightened. Something inside her broke open a quiet grief that had lived in silence too long. She sat on the edge of the chaise lounge, hands clasped in her lap. He didn't sit beside her. He knelt. Right there in front of her, Elliot knelt, not as a man asking for anything, but as someone offering stillness. Clara lowered her head, closed her eyes. Let herself feel it this moment. Not romance, not rescue, just the soft, unfamiliar breath of being held in someone's gaze with no demands. After a long pause, she finally spoke. Tomorrow it will all come rushing back. Harrison, the press, the whispers, Elliot nodded. And you'll handle it. On your terms. She opened her eyes. Why are you here? Elliot, really? He stood slowly. I came to see a property, but I stayed because I saw a woman who didn't know she still had power. Clara stood facing him. I don't want to be rescued. I don't want to be your rescuer, he said. I want to be the reason you remember you didn't need one. A long silence settled between them. Finally, Clara exhaled. Good night, Elliot. He smiled, soft, respectful, steady. Good night, Clara. He let himself out, closing the door gently behind him. She stood in the silence that followed, hand resting on the frame. For the first time in years, she didn't feel trapped inside this house. She felt like the walls had started listening. And this time, they were listening to her. Morning crept through the tall windows of Bellevue in quiet gold streaks, painting the antique wallpaper in soft light. Clara lay awake in bed, not from restlessness but from awareness. Something had shifted inside her, and it wasn't going back. The house was quieter than usual. No footsteps in the hallway, no clinking dishes from the kitchen staff. Just the hum of stillness that came after a storm that no one wanted to admit had passed through. She sat up slowly, fingers brushing the fabric of the navy wrap dress she had fallen asleep in. She hadn't meant to. But last night had worn her out, not just the public unraveling of Sabrina's performance, but the private reckoning in the study. The truth about Bellevue. The inheritance. Franklin's trust. And Elliot. Elliot. She touched her lips without meaning to, remembering the way he'd looked at her, not with desire but recognition. It had been years since anyone had looked at her like that. Like she mattered. Like her silence wasn't a void, but a presence. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She crossed the room, tying the sash around her waist, and opened the door. May stood there, already dressed, a folded newspaper in one hand and a knowing look in her eyes. Didn't mean to wake you, she said, stepping inside. But you're going to want to see this. Clara closed the door behind her. What is it? May handed her the paper. Clara unfolded it. Her breath caught. On the front page of the Savannah Tribune, a photo slightly grainy but unmistakable of Clara, standing tall in the ballroom, red wine on her gown, chin, lifted eyes locked on Sabrina. The headline read, Wife reclaims her power at Bellevue inside the Whitmore Gala shakeup. Clara sank into the nearest chair. They were filming, she whispered. May gave a tight smile. There's always someone filming these days, but what matters is what they saw. Clara's fingers tightened around the edge of the page. Franklin's team didn't kill it. Franklin didn't want to. He said, and I quote, "Let them see what a real Whitmore looks like." Clara stared at the photo. She didn't recognize herself. And yet, she did. It's everywhere now, May added. Social feeds, gossip blogs, even a think piece on women and dignity in Southern dynasties. You've become symbolic. Clara exhaled slowly. I didn't ask for this. No, May said, voice gentle. But sometimes power finds you when you finally stop ducking. Clara set the paper down and looked out the window. Harrison's going to hate this. He already does, May said calmly. He's been pacing the terrace since 6A. Clara didn't respond. May took a step closer. Don't let him pull you back, Clara. You already crossed the line they told you never to touch. After May left, Clara showered and dressed in soft gray slacks and a white blouse, no makeup, hair pulled back. The kind of outfit she used to wear when she still worked at the local art center. Before her name became a brand. Before she was married into silence. She stepped out onto the rear terrace. Harrison was there, hands braced against the stone railing, staring out toward the gardens. His suit jacket hung over the back of a chair. His tie was loose. He looked tired. I assume you've seen it, he said without turning. I have. He turned slowly. Do you know how many board members have already called me this morning? No, she said. But I imagine they had a lot to say. They want to know what's happening. Why my wife is being painted as some kind of rebellious figure, while our PR advisor is trending for the wrong reasons. Clara met his gaze. Maybe they should ask you? His eyes narrowed. You think this makes you look strong, airing family drama in front of donors and legacy partners? I didn't air anything, Clara said. I spoke, for the first time in a long time, and people happened to be listening, he scoffed. You humiliated Sabrina. She humiliated herself. She was trying to protect you, Clara cut in. The image of you, the one you built when you stopped being the man I married. Silence stretched. Clara took a step closer, voice quieter now. This house isn't yours, Harrison. His face barely moved, but she saw it there. A flicker of understanding. And fear. What are you talking about, Bellevue? Franklin transferred it to me years ago. I only found out last night. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's ridiculous. It's legal, she said. You can check the deeds. I did. He stared at her like she was a stranger. You can stay, she said calmly. For now, no one's throwing you out. But this house will no longer protect your choices. He stepped forward. You don't understand the damage this could do. I do, she replied. To you, not to me. And with that she turned and walked back inside, leaving him standing on the terrace alone with the reality he'd built. By noon, Franklin called a family meeting in the sunroom. The chairs were arranged in a semicircle. Harrison arrived late. Sabrina didn't show up at all. Clara sat between May and Franklin, silent at first. We're restructuring, Franklin announced simply. Effective immediately. There were murmurs, protests, questions, but Franklin raised one hand, and the room fell still. Clara will be overseeing the new Arts and Education Division under the Foundation, he said. Her vision will lead our outreach programs. The family legacy must reflect something more than numbers. Harrison stood. That's not her area. Franklin didn't blink. It is now. May smiled faintly. About time. After the meeting, as the family scattered in stunned silence, Clara walked through the East Garden, breathing in the scent of blooming camellias. The breeze was warm. The sky was high and clear. She heard footsteps behind her. Elliot, you heard she asked? He nodded. I heard. She smiled. They're calling me symbolic now. You are. I'm not sure I want to be. You don't have to be for them, he said gently. Just for you. They walked in silence for a moment. Then he said, Do you remember the painting in the West Hall? The one of the woman standing alone on the cliff? Yes. I used to stare at it when I felt lost. I asked Franklin about it, Elliot said. He told me she's not waiting for anyone. She's watching the storm pass and realizing she's still standing. Clara looked up at him. I think that's you now, he added. She didn't speak. She just reached for his hand. And this time, she didn't let go. The late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across Bellevue's west lawn, casting golden light through the wide oak trees that lined the garden path. Clara walked slowly beside Elliot, hand still resting in the warmth of his skin, grounding her like a truth she didn't have to explain. Neither of them spoke at first. They didn't need to. Everything around them felt suspended like the air before a summer rain. Not heavy, just full of something waiting. Clara finally broke the silence. Do you ever wonder how things end up this way, lives built on choices you don't even remember making? Elliot's voice was gentle. Or the ones you were too afraid to make. She glanced at him. That part. They reached the garden arch where a small bench sat half in sun, half in shade. Clara sat down, pulling her heels off with a quiet sigh. The grass beneath her feet was still warm. Elliot sat beside her, leaning back, eyes closed for a moment. Clara studied his face in profile. Calm, thoughtful, but carrying something behind the eyes. Something she hadn't asked about yet. "You've been kind to me," she said. He looked over. "I hope that doesn't come as a shock." "It doesn't," she said. "But I've learned not to trust kindness that comes without reason." "There's a reason," he said. She waited. "I came to Bellevue as an advisor," he said, "to help Franklin map out the next decade, expansion restructuring, but I also came to figure out why he stopped trusting his own blood." Clara's brow furrowed. "You mean Harrison?" "And others," Elliot said carefully. He said the house was full of people who saw power as inheritance, not responsibility. Clara exhaled. "He's right. He told me to watch not just the numbers but the people, the way they moved, who they listened to, who they ignored." Elliot gave her a small, knowing smile. "That's why I noticed you before you ever spoke." Clara looked down at her bare feet in the grass. "And what did you see?" she asked, quieter now. "A woman holding everything together by pretending she didn't exist," he said. "But even silence leaves a shape in the room." She didn't speak, didn't need to. The truth of it rang too close to her ribs. From the main house, music began to drift through the open windows, soft jazz from the piano in the library. Probably May. She always played when emotions ran high in the family. It was her way of keeping the peace, or reminding everyone that peace was still possible. Clara reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. A new message blinked on the screen. From Harrison. "We need to talk. Alone. Dinner? Tonight." She showed it to Elliot. His expression didn't change much. Just the smallest tightening at the corners of his mouth. "You're going?" he asked. Clara nodded. "I need to hear what he has to say, even if it's only to finally be sure." Elliot didn't argue. "Want me to wait?" She looked at him, thoughtful. "No. I want you to live your life without waiting on mine. But I hope you'll still be here." "I will." The honesty in his voice was a thread she could hold on to. Clara stood and slipped her shoes back on. "I need to change." He rose, too. "Clara." She turned. "You're not who you were last week, or even yesterday. Don't let him speak to the woman you used to be." She nodded slowly. "I won't." The dinner was set in the formal dining room. Smaller than the ballroom, but no less intimidating, with its chandelier velvet drapes and long, polished table that could seat 20, even though tonight there were only 2. Clara entered in a soft, black dress, simple pearl earrings, hair swept back. Not glamorous, but undeniable. Harrison stood when she entered, chair pulled out, like he remembered how to be a gentleman. That was always his way, performative care in public, silence in private. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I didn't come for you," she replied. "I came for clarity." They sat. For a few moments, nothing but the sound of silverware and glasses being filled. Finally, Harrison set his fork down. "You've humiliated me," he said quietly. Clara didn't flinch. "No, I told the truth. You were the one who let the lie live this long." He leaned back. "So this is who you are now. The woman who stages her comeback at my expense." Clara's laugh was soft, sharp. "You think I wanted this? Any of it, I would have given anything for you to notice me before I disappeared." He stared at her, and for once didn't have a reply. "You let Sabrina speak for you," Clara continued. "You let her walk through my home like she owned it, and you expected me to stay quiet. Again." "I didn't know it would go this far," he muttered. "No, you just didn't care how far I had to fall as long as no one watched." Silence again. Clara lifted her chin. "I'm not here to argue. I'm not even here to ask for an apology. I came because we need to be honest about what comes next." Harrison looked up, eyes tired. What does that mean? It means... Clara set her voice steady that this marriage stopped being a marriage a long time ago. And I won't keep pretending. He went still. You're divorcing me. I'm reclaiming myself. His hands gripped the edge of the table. Do you know what that'll do to this family? To my standing, I know exactly what it'll do, Clara said. It'll force people to stop confusing silence with unity. She stood, placing her napkin gently on the table. You taught me how to disappear, Harrison, she said. Now I'm teaching myself how to return. She turned and walked out before he could say another word. Outside, the air had cooled. Night had settled in soft and silver. Clara walked barefoot across the grass. This time heels in hand, the moonlight catching on the hem of her dress. She didn't know where Elliot was at that moment, but she knew who she was becoming. And this time she didn't need permission to belong to herself. The morning after the dinner with Harrison Bellevue was unusually still. Clara stood on the back veranda, a coffee cup in hand, eyes fixed on the lawn, where the early light turned the dew into tiny prisms. The conversation from the night before echoed in her mind, not like a wound, but like a final page turned. She'd said what needed to be said. There was no taking it back. And for the first time in years, she didn't want to. May appeared behind her, holding her own cup. I heard the staff mention you skipped dessert last night, she said, stepping beside her. Clara gave a small smile. Dessert wasn't the kind of sweetness I needed. May nodded, sipping slowly. You know, she added after a beat, the house feels lighter today. Clara tilted her head. Or maybe we do. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, before May said, Have you told Franklin yet? I will. I just needed to say it out loud to Harrison first. Make it real. May gave her a long, thoughtful look. You're not the same woman who arrived here last week. I don't want to be, Clara replied. That version of me knew how to survive. This one she wants to live. May smiled gently, then patted her arm and walked back inside. Clara remained watching the garden. She felt something shift again, not as dramatic as last night's confrontation, but just as important. A quiet opening inside her chest, like she'd made room for something new. That afternoon, the estate's art wing was being prepped for renovation. Clara had spent the last 2 days with Franklin's advisors and the foundation staff, discussing plans to convert it into a community arts center, a space for young creatives to learn, exhibit, and find their voices. Something Clara herself had once dreamed of when she was younger, before Bellevue became a gilded cage. As she walked through the high-ceilinged corridor, where old portraits had already been taken down, she saw Elliot standing by one of the tall windows, speaking with the head architect. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, and a faint smudge of dust marked his cuff. She watched him for a moment before stepping closer. Working hard, or pretending to supervise, she asked, her tone light. He turned a smile, tugging at his lips. Little of both. How's the layout coming? They're keeping the original molding, restoring the floors. Your idea about the rooftop garden caught everyone off guard in a good way. Clara shrugged. Kids need light and space to grow. He nodded. And vision. They walked together down the hallway, passing rooms in various stages of transformation. This was where Sabrina once hosted her strategy sessions, Clara said, glancing into a now empty room. All mirrors and mood boards, everyone pretending to care about community while angling for donor names. Elliot looked at her. And now it'll be a studio for teenagers. Paint on the walls, not politics. They stopped near a sunlit alcove where morning light poured in like honey across the marble floor. Elliot turned to her, expression more serious now. Can I ask you something? She nodded. Why did you stay with him for so long?" Clara took a breath. "Because I thought marriage was meant to be endured, not questioned. Because I convinced myself loyalty mattered more than happiness. Because I was afraid that walking away meant I failed." Her voice caught, but she held it steady. "I stayed until I couldn't recognize my own voice anymore. Until silence wasn't peace. It was absence." Elliot didn't rush in with comfort. He just stood there listening. Clara continued softer now, but I realized something after that dinner. I didn't fail. I just finished. He reached out, brushing a stray hair behind her ear, and let his hand rest at the curve of her neck for just a moment. His thumb traced her jaw gently. "You're not a woman who needs rescuing," he said. "You're a woman who needed space to remember she could rescue herself." Their eyes locked. "I don't want to be someone's second chance," she whispered. "You're not," he said. "You're the only chance that ever mattered." A beat passed. Clara stepped forward, her voice low but sure. "And if I fall again," Elliot leaned in so close she could feel his breath. "Then I'll sit beside you until you're ready to stand." She closed the distance and kissed him softly, deliberately, not because she was seeking something to fill a void, but because for the first time she wanted something for herself. When they pulled apart, neither said anything. The silence between them was full. Complete. Clara rested her forehead against his. "We can't rush this. I'm not going anywhere," he said. The next morning, Franklin summoned Clara to the library. She found him at the far end of the room, seated in his leather chair beneath the Whitmore family crest. The air smelled faintly of cigar smoke and old paper. "You're making waves," he said without looking up. Clara smiled. "Is that your way of saying you're proud?" He glanced at her. "It's my way of saying you're doing what I should have done years ago." She sat across from him, folding her hands. "I want to rename the estate program," she said. Franklin raised a brow. "Not the whole foundation, just the new wing. The part that's mine." He waited. Clara held his gaze. "I want to call it the room of her own." A long pause stretched between them. Then Franklin's face cracked into something rare, an almost smile. "It's fitting," he said. "And long overdue." Clara stood to leave, but before she reached the door, he added, "Your mother would be proud, Clara." She paused. So did her breath. "Thank you," she whispered. As she walked out into the afternoon light past portraits that no longer intimidated her past doors, she used to tiptoe around. She didn't just feel seen. She felt permanent. For the first time, this house didn't feel like something she was trying to survive. It felt like something she was building, and this time every room would have space for someone to breathe, including her. The sound of hammers echoed faintly through Bellevue's west wing, where renovation on the Arts Center had fully begun. Dust floated in the afternoon light, like glitter catching on the old wooden beams and faded murals that would soon give way to something entirely new. Clara stood near the double doors of the gallery room, clipboard in hand, scanning through the revised blueprint Franklin's team had sent over. Her brow furrowed slightly. "They moved the skylight again," she murmured to herself. "That can't happen. Natural light was the whole point." "You always were picky about lighting a voice," said behind her. Clara froze. She turned slowly. Sabrina stood in the archway, pristine as ever, in a fitted cream blazer, sunglasses perched atop her sleek hair, a leather folder tucked against her hip. Clara blinked. "You shouldn't be here." "Oh, I think I should," Sabrina said, stepping into the room like she still owned the floor beneath her. "I have a meeting with Franklin. Franklin's in Savannah until tomorrow." Sabrina smiled coolly. "Then I suppose I'll wait." Clara crossed her arms, letting silence settle between them before speaking again. Why did you really come back? Sabrina walked slowly around the edge of the room, her heels clicking on the hardwood. Because you're changing things, and change without oversight is dangerous. You mean change without you. Sabrina turned her tone syrupy and sharp. Let's not play the martyr, Clara. You've been quiet for years, and now suddenly you're the voice of the Foundation. Do you even know what that responsibility means? Clara's voice didn't waver. It means doing something meaningful instead of manipulating legacy for power. Sabrina laughed quick and dismissive. Please, you were content to be Mrs. Harrison Whitmore until 5 minutes ago. This little rebellion? It's cute, but don't confuse sympathy with legitimacy. Clara took a step forward, eyes locked on hers. I'm not looking for sympathy, Sabrina. I'm building something that outlasts gossip. Really? Sabrina asked. Because it looks like you're just enjoying your moment in the sun. Clara's jaw tensed. You don't get to decide when I rise. They stood there, a silent war between them, old resentments and unspoken truths stretching the air taut. Then Sabrina's smile softened almost too suddenly. Clara, she said, voice low. You and I both know what this is. I've seen it happen before. A wife pushed too far finds her spine rides the public wave. Until it crashes. And it will. Clara said nothing. Sabrina stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you know what happens to women like us when the spotlight moves on? Clara's reply was quiet. We stop being afraid of the dark. Sabrina blinked the smile, faltering for half a second. Then just as quickly she turned on her heel. Well, she said brightly, be sure to pass along my regards to Franklin. I'm sure he'll be delighted to know you're managing structural decisions now. I will, Clara said, and I'll also remind him why he stopped trusting you. Sabrina's eyes narrowed. Clara didn't flinch. Outside, Elliot was waiting near the veranda steps, watching the exchange from a distance. When Sabrina passed by, she offered him a knowing smile. Still playing the quiet support role, Mr. Monroe, she said with a tilt of her head. He didn't reply. When she was gone, Clara exhaled and leaned against the porch railing. She came to rattle me, Clara said. Did she succeed? Elliot asked gently. Clara looked out over the lawn. She made a mistake. She thinks I'm still trying to prove something. Elliot stepped closer. And you're not... No. Clara said quieter now. I've already proved it. I'm just not done building yet. He nodded, and they walked side by side through the garden path toward the back of the estate, where the new outreach space was being prepared. A few teens from the local school had arrived early, helping prep murals with the volunteers. One girl, a quiet, freckled 16-year-old named Lila, was sketching designs near the old fountain. Clara paused to watch her. She hasn't said much, one of the volunteers whispered. But she comes back every day. First one here, last to leave. Clara crouched beside Lila. Mind if I see what you're working on? She asked. Lila tilted the sketchbook toward her. It was a pencil drawing of a woman standing beneath a tree head, tilted to the sky, arms open, not in surrender, but in welcome. It's beautiful, Clara said, voice soft. Who is she? Lila shrugged. I don't know yet. Maybe me. Maybe someone I want to be. Clara's throat tightened. She already looks powerful, she said. Lila gave a small smile, then returned to her work. As they walked away, Elliot turned to Clara. You know that girl, he asked. Not yet, Clara said. But I think she's the reason I'm doing this. Later that evening, as golden hour spilled across Bellevue's front steps, Harrison appeared by her study door. He looked worn. Not angry, just tired. We need to talk, he said. Clara remained seated at her writing desk. We already have. He hesitated. I've spoken to a lawyer. We'll make it clean. She nodded slowly. Thank you. He stepped inside, but didn't sit. I meant what I said before, he added. About how this looks, the headlines, the attention. I don't care how it looks, Clara said. I care how it feels, for once. He exhaled and looked around the room. You're not who I married. No, Clara said. And maybe that's the best thing that's ever happened to me. There was a long pause. I loved you once, he said. I know, she replied. I just stopped being the version of me that made it easy for you. He left without another word. That night, Clara walked the halls of Bellevue, slowly touching the walls, the banisters, the doors she used to close without question. She stopped at the portrait of Franklin's mother, another woman who had once kept this house standing through storms no one dared name. Clara looked up at her, then at her own reflection in the glass. I'm not finished, she whispered, not even close. And the silence that answered her felt more like applause than emptiness. The morning sky hung heavy with low clouds, a blanket of silver quiet that settled over Bellevue, like a hush before a confession. Rain hadn't come yet, but the air was swollen with the promise of it. Clara stood alone in the unfinished studio space, the smell of fresh paint clinging to the walls. Tall windows framed the garden, and beneath them easels had been set up for the first group of students scheduled to arrive next week. There were still details to smooth out grant paperwork, city permits, last-minute construction, but standing there now she could almost hear the voices that would fill the room. Laughter, questions, possibility. She was deep in that moment when Elliot walked in his steps, soft against the floor. I thought I'd find you here, he said. Clara turned and smiled, faint but sure. It's the only place I feel like I can breathe today. He looked around. It's coming together. It is. He moved closer, his voice quieter now. But you're not entirely. She didn't argue. Elliot reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. I got this last night. Thought you should see it. She took it from him, carefully opening the flap. Inside was a card embossed with the Whitmore Foundation's seal, and beneath it, a handwritten invitation. Clara Whitmore, you are formally invited to attend the annual Legacy Luncheon hosted by the Board of Directors to recognize the lifetime contributions of Franklin Whitmore and announce the Foundation's new direction. Date this Saturday, location. Bellevue Grand Ballroom. She looked up, brows drawn together. I wasn't told about this. It's been in the works for months, Elliot said. Originally, it was meant to honor Harrison. Clara's stomach turned, but she kept her expression still. And now they've rewritten the script. Franklin plans to name you as the future face of the Foundation. Publicly. Clara closed the envelope slowly. This is a stage, she said. Yes, people don't get honored on stages unless someone else gets quietly removed from it. Elliot nodded. Sabrina's resignation will be announced that day. She's not taking it well. Clara looked toward the windows. She never would. He stepped closer, voice gentler now. You don't have to say yes. I know, but I will, Clara said, because I'm not hiding anymore, and I won't let them write this chapter without me. There was a long pause between them. Then Elliot, his hand brushing hers, said, This could be the moment that closes the door on everything that held you back. She looked at him, her voice steady. Or the moment that opens the door to everything I'm meant for. He smiled, and she could see the pride there, the kind that didn't ask anything of her, just honored what she'd already become. That afternoon, as the storm finally broke, Clara found herself in Franklin's office. The windows rattled with wind, and thunder grumbled low in the distance. Franklin sat behind his desk, an old fountain pen between his fingers. The only light came from the desk lamp casting soft gold across his papers. "You've read the invitation?" he asked without looking up. "I have." "And I'll attend," she said. "But only if I speak." Now he looked at her. "You don't need to, I do," she interrupted gently. "If this is about legacy, then mine begins with telling the truth. Not just to them. To myself?" Franklin studied her for a long moment. "I'm proud of you, Clara, but that stage, it has teeth." "I'm not afraid of teeth," she said. "I've lived with wolves." He smiled, just slightly. "You remind me of my mother." Clara tilted her head. "You never talk about her. She built this house more than I ever did," he said quietly. "But she was never listed as founder, never named in articles. She believed dignity meant staying silent. I don't want that to be your story." Clara's eyes softened. "It won't be." By evening, news of the luncheon had begun to trickle through the house. Staff moved with a kind of quiet energy, aware something important was coming. May had already begun preparing floral arrangements for the ballroom, and trays of linen napkins were being steamed in the back kitchen. Clara stood by the fireplace in her room, staring at the black dress hanging by the wardrobe. Simple, elegant, timeless. Not chosen for who she used to be, not borrowed from someone else's idea of her. This one was hers. A knock came. She turned. "Come in." May entered with a small wooden box in hand. "I thought you might want this," she said. "It was your mother's." Clara took it carefully, opening the lid. Inside was a delicate gold locket with tiny etchings on the back. Her fingers brushed over the initials, E.J.W. Eleanor Jane Whitmore. "She wore it the day she got married," May said softly. "And the day she stood in front of the county board to fight for land rights. She believed in appearances, but only when they matched conviction." Clara swallowed the sudden lump in her throat. "Thank you." May touched her arm. "You've already changed this house. But this weekend you change what it means to carry the name." When May left, Clara sat in front of the mirror, the locket resting in her palm. In the reflection, she didn't see a wife who had endured or a figure people whispered about. She saw a woman about to step into the light, not to be admired, but to take her place. The storm outside had passed, and inside Bellevue a different kind of weather had begun to take hold. Something steadier, something stronger, something she had shaped with her own hands. One room at a time. The Bellevue Grand Ballroom shimmered with golden light, every crystal pendant on the chandelier catching its own star. It had been months since the estate hosted an event of this size, and even longer since the attention had been pointed at someone like Clara. She stood at the top of the main staircase, still unseen, watching the guests flow in below. Politicians, socialites, donors, and distant family members filled the space with polite conversation and quiet calculation. Servers floated between them like shadows offering champagne and southern hors d'oeuvres. At the center of it all, the long banquet table glittered with silverware polished to perfection. This was the same room where Clara had once felt invisible, where Sabrina had spoken over her, where Harrison had looked through her, and now this was where the silence would break. Behind her, a soft voice. "You're not going to wait up here all night, are you?" Clara turned. Elliot stood by the threshold, straightened tie, soft smirk, and a gaze that steadied her more than any glass of champagne ever could. "I'm not hiding," she said. "Of course not," he replied. "You're planning your entrance." She smiled. "Something like that." His eyes softened. "You ready?" She nodded. "Yes." Together they descended the staircase. And as Clara stepped onto the marble floor, conversations began to dim, slowly, then noticeably. Heads turned. Whispers passed like ripples on water. She moved with quiet certainty, her black dress simple but powerful, the gold locket at her neck catching the light. Not a costume of confidence. an emblem of it. At the front of the ballroom, Franklin waited behind the podium. He gave a small nod as she approached. "Good crowd tonight," he said under his breath. "I noticed," she replied. He leaned closer. "I'll open. But this night belongs to you." He stepped to the mic, clearing his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," Franklin began, voice calm and deep. "Thank you for being here. Tonight is not just a celebration of legacy, but of transition, of acknowledging the future not as something uncertain, but as something earned." He glanced toward Clara. "For too long, this foundation has equated influence with inheritance. But leadership must evolve, and strength must be chosen, not assigned." A small wave of murmurs rippled across the crowd. Franklin continued. "Tonight I formally announce my retirement from public stewardship of the Whitmore Foundation, and I name Clara Whitmore as the new chair of the board." Gasps, a few claps, some polite, others stunned. And then a voice rang out loud and clipped. "This is absurd." Clara turned. Sabrina stood near the back of the ballroom, arms crossed, a tight smile painted over her fury. Her voice sliced through the air. "You're rewriting a legacy built on generations of precision, of leadership. This performance undoes decades of careful curation." Clara didn't flinch. She stepped forward. "I'm not rewriting anything, Sabrina," she said. "I'm telling the parts of the story you edited out." Sabrina laughed, but it was brittle now. "You don't get to walk into a room you've never led and claim authority." Clara's voice remained steady. "I've led quietly for years. In rooms no one paid attention to. I've watched, listened, organized, planned. And I've done it all while being ignored." Her gaze swept the room, but not anymore. The ballroom fell silent. Clara looked at Sabrina, her tone softer now. "I know what it's like to want a seat at the table so badly you'll do anything to keep it. But legacy is not just about power, it's about presence. And you've mistaken control for care." Franklin stepped forward again. "That's enough, Sabrina." She stood frozen for a moment, then turned and walked out. No dramatic exit, just footsteps that echoed a little too loud. Clara took a breath, then stepped behind the podium. "I never thought I'd stand here," she began. "Not because I wasn't capable, but because I was conditioned to believe capability wasn't mine to claim." She paused, letting the moment stretch. "For years I gave my voice away to keep the peace, to stay small, to survive rooms like this. But silence doesn't serve legacy. It erases it. A hush. The kind that comes when people aren't just listening, they're feeling it. This foundation will continue its work. But it will do so with new eyes. Eyes that see the unheard, the overlooked, the ones who carry rooms on their backs and get no mention in the credits." She touched the locket lightly. "This isn't just my beginning. It's an invitation. To every girl, every woman, every person who's been told they're not quite enough." Clara looked out across the crowd. "I am not here because I inherited a name. I'm here because I earned my place." Applause started slow, then steady, then thunderous. As she stepped away from the podium, Elliot was there. "You didn't just own the room," he whispered. "You rebuilt it." She took his hand, eyes bright but unshed. Not alone. And somewhere in that ballroom, once a monument to power, now a chamber of reckoning, something broke open. Not in destruction, but in light. The morning after the luncheon, Bellevue felt unusually quiet. Not empty, but still like the house itself was holding its breath. Clara stood in the sunroom with the windows open, letting in the scent of gardenia from the hedges below. The air was soft, humid, tinged with the light rustle of leaves. She had removed the locket and placed it on the writing desk beside her. Today she needed to just be Clara, not the woman at the podium, not the name in the headlines, not the symbol. Just herself. A knock came gently. She didn't turn. Come in. Elliot stepped inside, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. Thought you might need something warm, he said, placing one beside her. Clara took it, wrapping her hands around the mug. Do you ever feel hollow the day after something big? He nodded, pulling a chair closer, like the silence after a storm. The world keeps turning, but you're still in the eye of it. I thought I'd feel relieved, she said. But now it's just quiet. What if the noise was what made it all feel real? He leaned forward, voice low. Clara, it wasn't the noise that made you real. It was the choice, the moment you stood there and claimed your story. She looked down at her hands. I'm scared that yesterday was the climax, that the rest is just slow decline. Elliot studied her. No, yesterday was your declaration. What comes next is the life you get to build from it. She sat back, letting his words sink in. There was a knock on the outer hall door, firmer this time. May peeked her head in. You've got a visitor. Clara raised a brow. Who? May hesitated, then opened the door wider. A young woman stepped inside, no more than 25, dressed in business casual, but visibly nervous. I'm sorry to show up unannounced, the woman said. My name's Natalie Brooks. I'm a journalist with Southern Outlook. I watched your speech last night. I think a lot of people would want to hear more. Clara tilted her head. More, Natalie clutched her notebook. Not just about the foundation, about you, your voice, your story. Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she gestured to the chair across from her. Have a seat. Natalie smiled, relieved, and pulled out her recorder. May I? Clara nodded. The recorder clicked on a tiny red light glowing. Natalie leaned in. When did you first feel like your voice mattered? Clara's eyes drifted to the open window. Not until recently. For years I gave it away, bit by bit, to keep peace, to avoid conflict, to stay married. Natalie scribbled something. But losing your voice doesn't happen all at once, Clara continued. It's gradual. You compromise in small ways, thinking you're being gracious or patient. Until one day you look around and realize the life you're living was written by someone else. Elliot watched her, his gaze full of something deeper than pride. Natalie asked, was there a moment where you knew you couldn't stay quiet anymore? Clara looked down at her mug, then back up. Yes. The night my husband's mistress mocked me in my own home, in front of my family. And no one said a word. Natalie's eyes widened, but she said nothing, waiting. Clara leaned in slightly. It wasn't about the insult. It was about the silence. I realized I had spent too long letting other people write the story of my worth. Natalie let the silence linger respectfully before asking. And now Clara smiled. Now I'm the one holding the pen. When Natalie left later that morning, Clara stood at the doorway for a moment, watching her car disappear down the long drive. Then she turned back inside and walked through the house with a different rhythm. As she passed the old parlor, she paused. The room had been untouched since before her mother passed. Clara stepped inside, brushing dust from a chair, pulling the drapes open. Light poured in. She moved to the back wall, where an old linen-covered easel sat tucked behind a cabinet. Pulling off the cloth, she stared at the half-finished painting underneath. It was one of her mother's broad strokes of a southern landscape, magnolia trees, and marshland unfinished in the bottom corner. Clara ran her fingers along the edge of the canvas. May appeared behind her. Haven't seen that in years. Clara turned. She never got to finish it. May smiled softly. Maybe it's waiting for you. Clara looked back at the canvas. Then to May. Would you help me bring up my paints from the cellar? That afternoon she sat by the window in the parlor brush, in hand the smell of oil and turpentine, rising gently around her. Outside, the magnolia tree swayed in the wind. She didn't need an audience. She didn't need applause. For the first time in decades, she was creating not for praise or validation, but for herself. And in that quiet act, something in her settled. Because even after the applause faded, she was still here. And her story was just beginning. The scent of linseed oil lingered in the parlor, mixing with late afternoon light that stretched long and golden across the floor. Clara sat before the canvas brush, poised mid-air, the outline of a marshland blooming slowly beneath her steady hand. There was something quiet but sacred about the space now, as though time moved differently in this room where her mother had once created, and where she now picked up that thread. A soft knock pulled her from her focus. "Come in," she said, without turning. Elliot stepped inside, holding a small box in his hands. "You left this in the ballroom," he said. "Under the podium." Clara turned to him. "What is it?" He set the box down gently. "Not sure, but your name's on it." She wiped her hands with a cloth, walking over. The tag on the box was handwritten in thin, curling script, "Clara from someone who finally sees." Inside was a photograph, old black and white, slightly creased at the corners. It was her, maybe no more than 25, standing beside Harrison at a gala. But it wasn't the pose that caught her breath, it was her eyes. They were dim, distant, caught in a smile that wasn't quite real. Beneath the photo, a note. "You were already powerful then. You just hadn't looked in the mirror long enough to see it." Clara's fingers trembled slightly. "Who sent this?" she asked. Elliot hesitated. It came through a courier. No return label. Clara looked at him, emotion stirring just beneath her composed surface. "You think it was Sabrina? She's not known for sentiment?" "Maybe someone else who was in that room," Clara said quietly. "Someone who saw what I didn't know I was showing." She placed the photo carefully on the desk, then looked at Elliot. "Did you ever see me like that?" He met her eyes. "I saw you surviving. I just didn't know how long it had been since you'd truly lived." Silence stretched between them, soft, charged, not uncomfortable. Clara nodded once, slowly. "Thank you for staying." Elliot moved a little closer. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be." They didn't touch, they didn't have to. The air between them held something fuller than romance. It held understanding grown slowly, over years, watered by patience. Later that evening, Clara walked through the mansion with a notebook in hand, jotting down notes for the arts program's expansion. As she passed the study, she noticed a thin envelope tucked beneath the door. Another note. This one was from her father-in-law. "Clara, I know I've never been good at saying what matters when it matters, but I watched you that night in the ballroom and I realized something. Bellevue was never just a house. It was a mirror. It shows who we are if we're brave enough to look. You looked, and what you showed, all of us, was grace. Not the polite kind, the powerful kind. The kind that doesn't ask permission, if my son can't see that it's his loss. But I do. And I'll make sure the foundation always reflects it, too." Franklin Clara closed her eyes, exhaling slowly. It wasn't approval she needed, not anymore. But recognition still meant something, especially when it came from someone who had once been a distant pillar of this world. May appeared a few minutes later, with 2 cups of tea. "I figured you hadn't eaten," she said, setting them down. "You get this look when your brain's doing too much." Clara smiled, easing into one of the chairs. "It's been a strange day." May sipped her tea. "Strange is good, means something's changing." Clara looked out the window. The last light of evening painted the garden in orange and violet. I used to think love had to come in grand gestures. Roses, dinners, attention. But lately, I think maybe it looks more like someone showing up, bringing tea, fixing chairs, listening when it's quiet. May smiled. That sounds a lot like Elliot. Clara didn't deny it. May leaned back. You think you'll let yourself love again? Clara stared into her cup. I don't know, she said. But I think I'd like to find out. As night fell over Bellevue, Clara returned to the parlor and added one more stroke to the canvas. Just a brush of gold across the sky, enough to say the storm had passed. And something new, something gentle and real, was finally on the horizon. The morning sun filtered through the parlor windows like warm silk, casting gentle light over the finished canvas. Clara stood before it, brush finally set aside, arms crossed lightly over her chest. The painting now breathed with color marshland, reaching into a horizon of gold framed by blooming magnolias, with a single small figure standing at the edge of it all. Alone, but not lost. May came in drying her hands with a kitchen towel. She stopped when she saw it. You finished it, she said, her voice soft. Clara nodded. I think it finished me too. May stepped closer. That's your mother's silhouette, isn't it? It is, but it's also mine. Or maybe the woman I used to be. May smiled gently. It's beautiful, Clara. Before she could respond, the front doorbell echoed through the house. Clara glanced at the clock. That's early. May raised a brow. Want me to get it? Clara shook her head and walked through the hallway toward the grand entrance. She opened the door to find a man in his late 20s, nervously clutching a leather folio dressed in a neatly pressed shirt, eyes wide as he looked up at the mansion. Ms. Whitmore, he asked. Yes, I'm Jamie Ortega from the Charleston Morning Press. We heard about the new art program starting here, and I was wondering if you'd be open to a feature story. Something about Bellevue's legacy shifting into the next generation. I heard what you said at the luncheon. Clara blinked, caught off guard. You want to talk about the art program and about you, he said quickly. What it means to reclaim a space like this. You're not just restoring a building, you're restoring a voice. She stood for a moment in silence, absorbing the weight of that phrase. Come in, she said, finally stepping aside. They settled into the sunroom, light dancing over the floor as Jamie opened his notebook. I'll be honest, he said, I expected this place to feel colder. Clara smiled. It used to. I think it's learning. He laughed, then asked, Why art? Why this house? She paused, thinking. This house was built to impress, but for years it didn't feel like anyone actually lived in it. My mother tried to fill it with love. My father-in-law tried to fill it with order. And I tried to disappear in it, until I couldn't anymore. Jamie scribbled quickly. Art, Clara continued, is the only thing that ever made me feel seen without having to explain myself. I figured maybe other people, young people, women, deserved that too. He looked up. That's powerful. Just then, Elliot appeared at the doorway, catching Clara's eye with a quiet nod. Jamie noticed. Is that Elliot Dalton from the Foundation's board? Clara chuckled. More than that. Jamie tilted his head. Are you two still figuring that part out? Clara said honestly. But yes, he's part of my story. Jamie made a few more notes. Would you mind if we took a photo of you with the new program space? Clara led him down the hall to the newly renovated East Wing. Where dusty walls once loomed now, there were soft pastels, shelves of supplies, easels neatly arranged by the windows. As Jamie clicked a few pictures, Clara looked around at what had once been Harrison's old office. Now it was a room of color-light possibility. Laughter would echo in here soon. Jamie turned back to her. Thank you for this. I think people are hungry for stories like yours. Not just about wealth or power, but healing, rebuilding. She nodded. We all need to believe that broken things can be made beautiful again. After he left, Clara wandered back to the parlor, only to find Elliot still waiting there. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "You handled that like a pro," he said. "I didn't plan on being anyone's story," she replied. "I just didn't want to be erased anymore." Elliot stepped closer. "You've become more than a story, Clara. You're a voice." She hesitated, then asked quietly, "Do you think I'm ready for all this?" He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "You've already done the hardest part. You stopped asking permission." There was a pause, a shared silence where everything that had gone unsaid found its place. Then Clara looked toward the canvas again. "I want to donate that piece," she said suddenly. Elliot blinked. "To the program?" "No," she said. "To the Charleston Women's Museum. It's not just mine anymore. It's for every woman who ever stood at the edge of something and didn't know she could step forward." Elliot smiled. "Then let's make sure they see it." And as the afternoon sun warmed the room, Clara stood tall in the home that had once tried to shrink her. Now it carried her name not just on paper, but in purpose. The late spring breeze swept through the magnolia trees, soft petals drifting across the lawn like confetti from a quiet celebration. The Bellevue estate, once a fortress of rigid tradition, now buzzed with something new laughter music movement. Children's voices echoed from the east wing, where easels stood lined beneath tall windows, and fresh canvas waited like open invitations. Clara stood by the second-story window, watching as volunteers and young artists filed into the newly christened May Whitmore Center for Arts and Voice. The plaque had been unveiled that morning during a small, heartfelt ceremony. Clara had read the inscription herself, hands trembling slightly as she said May's name out loud, full of gratitude. She turned as May walked into the room, holding 2 mugs of tea. "It's done," May said, handing one over. "The center is officially open." Clara smiled. "It's not just the center. It's the future." May looked out the window, eyes a little misty. "You know, I used to clean these windows when your mother-in-law was alive. I never imagined I'd see this place filled with color and children and music." Clara placed a hand on May's arm. "You were always part of it. You just weren't given credit." "Well, I got my name on a building now," May said with a grin. But her eyes sparkled with something deeper. "I guess miracles do come late sometimes." They stood quietly for a moment. Then May nodded toward the hallway. "He's waiting downstairs." Clara didn't need to ask who. She walked through the corridor slowly, her heels clicking softly on the polished wood floors. As she reached the foyer, she saw Elliot standing by the fireplace, flipping through an old book from the Whitmore Library. He looked up when he heard her footsteps. "You always seem to find the quiet corners," she said. He closed the book. "Only because I know you'll come looking?" Clara stepped closer, her voice thoughtful. "Do you remember what you said to me the day Harrison moved out?" He nodded. "Now you can breathe." She tilted her head. "It wasn't the leaving that helped me breathe. It was the choosing to stay, to rebuild, to reclaim. I saw that," he said, "from the beginning." She looked into his eyes. "I think I'm ready now." For what he asked, gently. "For joy," she said, "not just peace or purpose. Joy." Elliot's smile was quiet, reverent. "You don't need anyone's permission, Clara." She nodded, tears pricking the corners of her eyes. "But it's nice to be seen." He stepped closer. "I don't just see you. I trust you, admire you, and I would walk beside you for whatever comes next." She reached for his hand, folding her fingers around his. "Let's not rush it," she said. "Let's live it." They walked together out to the garden, where folding chairs were scattered paintbrushes lay forgotten, and laughter floated through the air like birdsong. A little girl from the center, a quiet one, maybe 9 or 10, walked shyly toward Clara, holding a folded piece of paper. "I drew this for you," she whispered. Clara opened the paper gently. It was a crayon drawing of the mansion, bright yellows and pinks exploding from the windows. In the top right corner, a stick figure stood smiling, a crown on her head. "That's you," the girl said. Clara knelt down, brushing a hair from the girl's cheek. "It's the best gift I've ever gotten." "Are you the queen now?" the girl asked. Clara laughed softly. "No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who finally learned how to use her voice." The girl nodded, as if that made perfect sense, and skipped back toward the art tables. Elliot walked beside Clara toward the arbor, where string lights had been hung in lazy loops across the trellises. The sun was beginning to set, draping the grounds in gold and lavender. "I have something for you," he said, suddenly pulling a small box from his pocket. Clara's breath caught for a beat, but when she opened the box, it wasn't a ring. It was a key. "What's this to the carriage house?" Elliot said. "I've been restoring it, quietly. Thought it could be your studio." Clara stared down at the key. "You fixed it up," he smiled. "Just the bones. The rest is yours to create." Her heart swelled. "This is more than enough. It's not a proposal," he said. "It's a promise. To keep showing up. To keep making space for your light." She leaned in, forehead against his. "That's the only kind of love I'll take now." They stood there until the stars began to blink into view one by one. Later that night, Clara returned to the parlor alone. She lit a single candle on the mantel and walked to the old cabinet in the corner. Inside was a leather-bound journal, her mother's. She hadn't opened it in years. Clara sat by the window, turned to the first page, and began to read. Then write, not just memories, not just plans, but truth, about loss, about reinvention, about rising without asking permission. And when she closed the journal an hour later, she knew. She had reclaimed more than a house or a foundation or a voice. She had reclaimed herself. And somewhere deep in the walls of Bellevue, where echoes of sorrow once lingered, a new sound had taken root. Laughter, light, and legacy.